Um, but again, Texas Revolution. So you're thinking the state of Texas on a map. At one point in time, Texas was a part of the Spanish territory in North America. Eventually, when Mexico wins its independence from Spain, Texas becomes a part of Mexico. Okay, so and then eventually Texas, the people of Texas will revolt against Mexico, and Texas will become its own independent country. So that's kind of doing some foreshadowing here. But again, Spain had control of like present day Mexico, Central America, and Texas for nearly 200 years, from the late 1600s into the early 1800s. Again, in 1821, Mexico is going to fight a war of independence against Spain for their independence. Okay, similar to how the United States fought Britain, how we fought Britain for our independence, Mexico will do the same. They're going to win their independence. As a part of that, Mexico becomes, think, main body Mexico, main area today. Mexico also included like California and Arizona and New Mexico, and obviously Texas, okay, or Tejas as they called it. All right, so there you go. Again, you see the map. So from 1821 to 1836, when Texas will fight a war of independence against Mexico, this was Mexican Texas. So it included the blue highlighted area here, and then the rest of the Mexican Empire was like the present day southwestern corner, right? So this is like present day California, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, that area. But here's Texas, this blue highlighted area. And again, from 1821 to 1836, that is going to be a part of Mexico. All right. Again, during this time period, we are also in manifest destiny. So you better believe the United States has its eyes on maybe acquiring some of this territory. We've kind of foreshadowed that here a little bit the past couple of class periods. All right. But kind of thinking about in, 1820s, 1830s, this is what Mexico and their land holdings in North America appeared to be. All right, so that's a large area. Okay, that's a big area of land. It's hard to maybe defend all of that too, considering that they're just coming off a war of independence against Spain, and they might be kind of running low on human capital and soldiers. But Mexico eventually develops this huge territory that they have to be able to defend. All right. Mexico was also very well aware of the fact that the United States was expanding during this time, and they wanted to prevent the United States from maybe acquiring any more territory, right? Countries oftentimes are not just willing to give up territory because, right? So Mexico is going to do something kind of different, and they want to try to allure, I should say, white settlers, especially into Texas. Okay, so Mexico is going to start this policy, I suppose you could say, of trying to encourage white settlement in Texas. Okay, so again, Texas is this blue shaded area here, what present day Texas looks like. So it's kind of mostly this blue area, some of this yellow, some of this orange. And what's going to happen is eventually they're going to reach out to a guy by the name of Moses Austin, and they're going to ask Moses Austin to start bringing in white settlers to Texas. Okay. They give Moses Austin a huge chunk of land, and they, pay him money, and they're going to say, as long as you keep bringing in white people, we'll continue to give you more land, more money, give them land and such. Well, that was all fine and great, but Moses Austin died before he could actually get any of that land developed. He had been traveling back home to Missouri after he had made a trip to Mexico, and he passes away. So those land holdings are then passed off to his son, Stephen. Okay, and Stephen Austin is going to be the guy that brings white settlers. Okay, Stephen Austin, the son of Moses Austin, he is going to be the guy that brings white settlers to Texas. Okay, he's going to be one of the largest. They call him an impresario, and we'll talk more about that here when we start going over the Cornell notes. And from 1830 to like 1834, the population of white settlers in Texas, it's going to skyrocket. These white Americans who came to Texas, they were promised land, obviously, and Texas has some pretty good farmland. However, by coming to Texas and receiving this land, they agreed not to bring slaves. They agreed to practice Catholicism, and they agreed not to do other things that might violate a moral compass, such as drinking alcohol. Well, you have white people coming to a place and you're giving them these rules, and they didn't agree with a lot of those rules. So that's going to kind of lead to some of these issues, and eventually what stems into a Texas Revolution. Eventually, as there's some tension that kind of builds up between the white settlers of Texas and Mexico. Again, Mexico starts to try to close off borders and doing some different things. And eventually what this is going to turn into is there is going to be a war fought between the people of Texas, between the people of Texas and Mexico. The white settlers of Texas are going to declare their independence. And again, that's going to lead to a very short war, actually, only lasting about a half a year between the people of Texas and Mexico. And, as history tells us, the Texans, as they were called, right? The white Texan settlers, they are going to defeat Mexico. And then Texas, really interestingly enough, is going to actually exist as its own republic for a period of about 9 years, before it becomes a part of the United States. They're going to draft a Declaration of Independence during this Battle of the Alamo that we'll talk about in a little bit, the one that I'm sure most of you have probably already heard of before. And eventually, again, Texas becomes its own, quote unquote, its own republic, I guess you could say. And they're going to fight Mexico for that independence. So that's just kind of to provide a little bit of a background here on some different things going on. Okay, so we'll get back into the Cornell notes, so you can go ahead and you can open those up. Again, these are not due for you guys until Monday, but we'll start talking about, and they'll be due Monday at the end of class. All right, so keep that in mind. Get this opened up here quick. And we'll start talking through the Cornell notes, all right? And then we'll kind of transition back and forth between that and a couple other documents. All right, so as long as this will open up. Perfect. Okay, so again, this first section of this next section of Cornell notes, this first section on 7.2, this has all to do with the Texas Revolution. Now, again, Section 2 and Section 3, a lot of it focuses on Texas. But one big thing I want you guys to understand is that the Texas Revolution and the Mexican-American War are two very different things that are separated by about 10 years of time, okay? Texas is going to fight Mexico for its independence. Texas is then going to become an independent, republic for a period of time. Texas then becomes a U.S. state. And then after Texas becomes a U.S. state, the United States is going to fight a war against Mexico for the rest of the Mexican land. Okay, so make sure you understand Texas Revolution, Texas fights Mexico for independence, and Mexican-American War, the United States fights Mexico over the boundary of Texas and for the rest of the Mexican territory about 10 years later. Okay, so keep that in mind here. But as we're talking about this, we've kind of alluded to some of this already. Stephen F. Austin, again, one of the most important people here when we start talking about Texas Revolution and it all starting. Stephen F. Austin was the land agent
No, we're losing you.
You're losing me. I'm not saying anything right now, though. Can you hear me? Can you still hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
I'm good. Okay. Yeah, I just hadn't said anything. So again, Stephen Austin, he's going to be the guy who's going to bring white settlers to Mexican Texas. Again, Mexico had, I would understand that Mexico had promised him money and land. For bringing white settlers to Texas. Okay. Again, one of the big reasons why Mexico wanted white settlers, okay, they wanted Anglo-Saxon white American settlers to come to Texas, one of the biggest reasons for that was not only to protect like the borders of their huge empire, but I would also know that one of the big reasons why Mexico specifically wanted white settlers was because if the United States at any point in time decided to say, I don't know, try to fight a war with them, for example, that the United States would be a lot less likely to fight white Americans than they would be to fight Mexicans. Okay, however, by coming to Texas, the settlers also agreed that they would become Mexican citizens, which none of them ever really did that formally, so there is that too. But that was kind of one of the primary motivations of Mexico in asking for white settlers, was because they didn't want the United States. They kind of wanted to fend off any potential conflict between the United States and them, because if they had white Americans living there, the United States would be a lot less likely to try to fight them and declare war to acquire land. Okay, which eventually is going to happen anyways. It's just going to be a little ways down the road. These next couple of things, I'm not going to go over this a whole heck of a lot, but this is kind of just alluding to the fact that at one point in time, Spain controlled present day southwestern United States. They had built up quite the mission system for spreading Catholicism. These forts that they had built as a part of their mission system were known as presidios. Eventually, when Mexico becomes independent of Spain, Mexico will start trading more with the United States after they're independent. And again, eventually this is going to lead Mexico into inviting white settlers to Texas. Okay, so these two things here, I'm not going to focus a whole heck of a lot on those, just kind of glancing over them. But again, Mexico, like we said, starts inviting U.S. settlers. Again, we talk about reasons for why that was. And two big reasons for that, again, was to protect the borders. Protect the borders of Texas from raids by Native Americans. And to discourage any potential dispute with the United States. So what we're saying here is, again, because Mexico had quite the land holding here with their North American territory, by inviting U.S. settlers to Texas, not only were they trying to protect their borders of Texas, but they were also trying to discourage any potential dispute with the United States. So again, kind of like we already said, is that Mexico was very well aware of manifest destiny and that the United States historically had been expanding. That was very well known to Mexico. And so by having more white U.S. settlers there, even though they were quote unquote supposed to become Mexican citizens, they thought that would maybe discourage the United States from trying to start a war with them, because the United States would not want to, fight essentially what could become a civil war. All right. But interestingly enough, eventually this does lead to a civil war, but we'll come back to that. This term here, empresarios. So Stephen Austin was one of these, but empresarios were U.S. land agents hired by Mexico to bring white settlers to Texas. So one of the biggest empresarios, again, one of the most important was Stephen Austin. He brought settlers to Texas. He was given a whole lot of land. Eventually, interestingly enough, a lot of the land that he was given becomes known as Austin, Texas. Kind of ironic, right? All right, but these empresarios, again, just a term to describe land agents that were hired by Mexico to bring white settlers to Texas. I would understand that Austin, when he was in Texas, he became very popular. He became very popular with the Texans, the white people, I guess you could say, that were living there. I mean, he was kind of like their George Washington of sorts for a period of time. But he was popular with the people of Texas, the white settlers at least. Um, and eventually what's going to happen is it leads to some more white settlers arriving in Texas. You know, over a period of about 4 years, the white population of Texas is going to double and then some. And I would also know that that's going to bring some other challenges. So the next thing that we get into is that Texas is going to fight for independence. Again, as more and more white settlers come, I understand that's going to lead to more issues with Mexico. Again, Mexico, they asked that these Texans, these white settlers as well, you know, the Texans, the white U.S. settlers that were coming there, they would ask them to convert to Catholicism. They would ask them to not bring slaves. They had these different rules. I would understand that eventually what does happen is because of some of these rules and such, and you know, for the most part, I mean, this is even common in our society today. The more rules that we have, the more upset we become. But I would simply understand that they became very resentful of the quote-unquote rules that they were asked to follow. So again, some of these rules that they were asked to follow would be like no slavery or not bringing slaves, which pretty much all of them did. Becoming Catholic. And becoming Mexican citizens, which none of them really did, and that's going to lead to a very strained relationship between them and Mexico. Stephen Austin is actually, as some of this, and then eventually Mexico, what they do is they actually tighten some of their regulations too, like they're going to close off Texas to white settlement. Again, Texas, eventually it's found out that the soil was pretty suitable for growing crops and stuff, and people love free land. You know, we as people love free stuff. But the Texans become very resentful of this. Eventually what's going to happen is this guy here, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, he was the military, he wasn't even a president, he was quote unquote a president. He was the military dictator of Mexico. And the people of Texas hated him. Okay. The people of Texas especially hated him after he had Stephen Austin in prison. So Austin's going to make a trip to Mexico City. I believe in the year it'd be 1835, 1834, somewhere in those lines. He's going to make a trip, which is a long journey, right? Mexico City is like in the central part of Mexico. So traveling from Texas to Mexico City is quite the jaunt. And when he gets there, he's trying to talk to Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. Well, let's call him Santa Anna for short. But he's going to try to talk to Santa Anna about some of these regulations and such, because it's really upsetting the people in Texas. And again, Mexico City and Texas, it's kind of the same idea between Britain and the American colonies. Is there's a lot of miles between the two. And essentially what had happened is kind of the same thing that had happened in the American colonies. Is the people of Texas thought that they could govern themselves better than Mexico could. And so Stephen Austin is going to make a trip to Mexico City to present that to Santa Anna. and saying, hey, let us kind of do our own thing. Let us be independent. We'll still, kind of be a part of Mexico, but kind of just stay out of our business. We're doing all right without you guys. We've developed some of our own militias and different things like that. And Santa Anna, when Austin is about to leave to go back to Texas, Santa Anna has him thrown in jail. So when word gets back to the people of Texas that Stephen Austin was imprisoned by Santa Anna, that's what's ultimately going to start this Texas Revolution, okay, where the people of Texas are going to say, you're throwing our guy in jail. That's enough. So the Texans, they kind of, band together. And one of the very first things they're going to do, so again, this Texas Revolution, it's going to basically start after they receive word in Texas that Stephen Austin was thrown in jail. So in late 1835, okay, like the fall of 1835, that's when the people of Texas are going to kind of rally together. They're going to kind of rally together, and they're going to start trying to take over different forts in Texas, okay? One of the most infamous, famous, however you want to say it. And Santa Anna is also going to send his military to Texas as well, because he declares them being a state of revolt. But what's going to happen is that Santa Anna and his army, they're going to march north into Texas to try to end this quote unquote, this revolution of sorts. And one of the most infamous encounters is going to be at this Battle of the Alamo. Okay. So again, the Alamo was a Spanish fort, very old Spanish fort. In San Antonio, Texas. And the Texans had taken it over. Okay. About, 200 or so Texans had taken this fort. Okay. And that was kind of like it was a very important, a very important location to Mexico, because that Alamo had been there for a very long time. It was, one of the original Spanish mission forts. And again, it gets taken over by the Texans. And again, when we're saying Texans, juniors, we're referring to the white settlers. And again, they're going to hold it. Eventually what's going to happen, though, is Santa Anna and his army. And again, he had about 2,000 people marching with him. Okay, this army that's going to go and meet up with the Texans at the Alamo. So Santa Anna and his army, we'll say, are going to lay siege on the Alamo. So what happens eventually is that the Texans who are located in the Alamo, and these were big names like Davy Crockett, Jim Bowie, William Travis, some of these guys. And again, Davy Crockett had been like a U.S. senator, okay, and he basically resigns his post because he decides he wants to go to Texas and be a part of this revolution. But Santa Anna and his army, they're going to march and lay siege on the Alamo. And it's really interesting because, like, the people who were at the Alamo, the Texans who were there, the way the story goes is that they were all given the option to leave. Jim Bowie and William Travis and Davy Crockett, they said, hey, anybody who wants to go, you need to go, because if we stay here, we're all probably going to die, which is essentially what happened. So the 200 or so Texans, and nobody left. That's the crazy thing, too, is nobody left. They knew they were going to lose. They stayed anyways. And eventually Santa Anna and his army of 2,000, they're going to lay siege to the Alamo and kill pretty much everybody, all the Texans who were there. There ends up being a couple women and a couple children who are spared by Santa Anna. And Santa Anna was a cold human being, okay? He was, you talk about evil people in history. Santa Anna was by far one of the most evil. Okay, you don't hear much about him because we always hear about like Hitler and Stalin and Hussein and people of that nature. But Santa Anna was right up there. Okay, he would have people kidnapped, and he was a senseless murderer and not a great human being. But Santa Anna, his army, they're going to lay siege to the Alamo. Pretty much everybody dies, including Davy Crockett and Jim Bowie and William Travis and others. But this Battle of the Alamo Juniors, it becomes kind of like the rallying call of the Texas Revolution. And again, this is in February, March of 1836. You know, the Texas Revolution starts like in the fall of 1835. And this Texas Revolution is, again, it's going to be very short-lived. Something that's going to happen shortly after the Battle of the Alamo, there's going to be another 300 Texans. There's going to be another 300 Texans. And again, we call it the Battle of the Goliad. I think your textbook actually calls it the Goliad Massacre. But there was 300 Texans who were, again, Texan soldiers who were hanging out by the Goliad River one day. Santa Anna and his men are going to march up on them, surprise them. Santa Anna is going to order that every single one of them is executed. So this is like April of 1836, March of 1836. These two things aren't separated by a whole lot of time. And so things are not arguably going very well for the Texans right now, except that they have a lot of support. And, you know, very shortly after these two events, at this Battle of San Jacinto, Santa Anna and his men are actually going to be, I can't spell, not Santa. So Santa Anna and his men, they're going to get captured by Sam Houston. So again, Sam Houston was actually, I believe he was also from, I want to say he was from Missouri originally, but he's going to come to Texas while this is going on. And Sam Houston really becomes kind of like the savior of this Texas Revolution. But Santa Anna at this Battle of San Jacinto, he's going to be captured by Houston and the Texan forces. I would also know that Santa Anna is going to be forced to sign what was called the Treaty of Velasco. That allows, or I'll say this, not allows, but basically what this treaty did is it forced Mexico and Santa Anna to recognize the independence of Texas. So following this Battle of San Jacinto, and with Santa Anna being forced at gunpoint, by the way, Sam Houston literally held a gun to this cat's head and forced him to sign this Treaty of Velasco that's going to make Mexico recognize the independence of Texas. Texas is now independent. So again, Sam Houston is kind of like the savior. Kind of like the savior of the Texas Revolution. He's going to go on to become the first president He's going to go on to become the first president of Texas, the Republic of Texas. Okay, first president of... First president of the Republic of Texas, or also known as the Lone Star Republic. So maybe a hint, hint, wink bonus. Because, again, their flag has one star, hence Lone Star. It was nicknamed the Lone Star Republic. But Sam Houston becomes very important there as well. Again, he had led Texan forces at the Battle of San Jacinto against Santa Anna, ultimately leading to this Treaty of Velasco that is going to recognize the independence of Texas. So, again, all of these things here, the Alamo, well, really the start of the revolution to Texas becoming an independent country, those events are separated by a few months. Okay, this wasn't like a year, multiple year long thing. This was all separated by a few months of time. So the next big topic is, Texas is independent. Texas has a very high population of quote unquote white people who were mostly American, right? Originally from the United States. So I would understand that this next thing here where it says Texas joins the Union, after Texas becomes an independent republic, right, when they win their independence from Mexico, the next big topic that starts to happen is what we call annexation. Annexation simply means to bring into a larger union, such as the United States. So the conversation that starts occurring in Congress is, hey, can we annex Texas? Can we bring Texas into the United States as a U.S. territory? Because again, after Texas became independent of Mexico, they were independent. They were their own country, essentially, right? They were their own republic. Well, what's going to happen is there's going to be about a period of 9 years, okay, almost a decade, that Texas will be its own republic. However, there's a huge conversation that starts occurring in Congress about what we call, again, annexation. Should the United States do this? And again, why this becomes such a political thing is think back to that Missouri Compromise that we discussed previously. The slave states, do you think for sure that they wanted to bring Texas in? Absolutely, right? So that becomes a huge thing. I would understand that, again, the slave states of the United States wanted to add Texas immediately. They wanted to annex it, I guess you could say. Free states The free states of the United States oppose annexation. And again, think about that. That has to do with slavery. Okay? That if we add Texas to the United States, that would upset the balance of free to slave states. Okay, what I would know is in December of 1845, Texas is added as a U.S. state. I believe they're the 26th state. Somebody can look that up if you want, but I believe it's the 26th state in December of 1845. Okay, so that's just in a nutshell a little bit about Texas and the revolution here. Again, Texas Revolution has to do with Texas becoming independent of Mexico. All right, so that's what this section 2 here is all about. All right. Do we have, I'll stop my share here. I'm going to stop my video as well.